Deep within the mist-shrouded hollows of eastern Kentucky, where fog drifts through ancient valleys and silence guards. Unspeakable secrets, families once existed whose bloodlines remained untouched by the outside world across multiple generations. These are the forbidden accounts that powerful forces attempted to expunge from our collective memory. The year 1897 marked when traveler Jonathan Pritchard first happened upon the Fugate settlement along Troublesome Creek. The visions he witnessed would pursue him relentlessly until his final breath. 17 families comprised this community, each sharing the Fugate surname, inhabiting crude wooden structures scattered throughout a secluded valley accessible solely through treacherous mountain passages. Yet poverty wasn't what shocked Pritchard most profoundly. Their coloration defied explanation. Every Fugate family member displayed an unnatural azure complexion, a phenomenon that surpassed contemporary medical understanding. Their faces, hands, and bodies exhibited a distinctive cerulean tint that marked them as different as cursed among men. Martin Fugate, the patriarch who had emigrated from France in 1820, unknowingly carried a recessive genetic anomaly. When he wed his cousin Elizabeth Smith, who harbored the identical concealed mutation, their offspring inherited a blood disorder that would shape generations yet unborn. The Fugates dwelt in absolute seclusion, marrying exclusively within their extended kinship network. Brothers wed sisters, cousins married cousins, uncles claimed nieces as wives. This practice emerged not from cruelty, but from necessity compounded by ignorance. Within these forgotten mountains, where the closest settlement lay 3 days distant, they understood no alternative existence. Their isolation encompassed both geography and society as neighboring communities ostracized them, branding them the Blue People while circulating rumors of demonic possession. By 1925, the Fugate population had expanded to 43 individuals, each displaying varied manifestations of the blue skin condition. Dr. Samuel Harding, a Lexington physician, journeyed to Troublesome Creek seeking answers. His journals, subsequently sealed by the State Medical Board, describe scenes that challenged his comprehension of both genetics and social convention. The youngest generation exhibited the most severe physical abnormalities. 7-year-old Rebecca Fugate could scarcely walk due to skeletal malformations. Her spine curved unnaturally while her legs bent at impossible angles. Her brother Thomas, age 9, possessed cognitive capabilities far below typical development. He communicated only in fragmented phrases and demanded continuous supervision. Their parents, first cousins twice removed, appeared resigned to their children's conditions, interpreting them as divine will rather than consequences of their intermarriage patterns. Dr. Harding documented 12 families within the Fugate settlement where parents shared bloodlines closer than third cousins. Medical complications extended far beyond blue pigmentation. Infant mortality reached 70%, with most babies perishing before reaching their first birthday. Survivors frequently bore physical abnormalities, misshapen craniums, missing digits, organs positioned incorrectly within their bodies. One child entered the world with eyes so widely spaced they couldn't focus simultaneously on identical objects. The settlement's social structure mirrored their genetic isolation. Elder Benjamin Fugate, aged 67, had fathered children with 3 of his daughters, justifying these unions through biblical precedents and the scarcity of available partners. His granddaughter, wife Martha, merely 19 years old, had already lost 4 infants to mysterious ailments. She sat in her cabin doorway, rocking an empty cradle, her blue, tinged tears falling onto worn wood as she hummed lullabies to phantoms. Neighboring communities whispered about the Fugates, but maintained fearful distance. Stories circulated regarding children born with strange deformities, about families concealing their most afflicted members in root cellars and attics. Local preachers declared the Blue people cursed for their sinful practices, though none dared venture into troublesome creek to save souls. The Fugates existed in a liminal space, neither fully part of society nor completely separate, trapped by geography and their own choices. As autumn descended upon the Appalachian Mountains in 1925, painting forests in amber and crimson shades, Dr. Harding prepared his report for the State Medical Board. His hands trembled as he composed the final paragraph describing conditions that would surely provoke action. The Fugate settlement represented a medical catastrophe decades in formation, a living laboratory of genetic consequences demanding intervention. Yet intervention would never materialize. Before Dr. Harding could submit his findings, his research papers mysteriously vanished from his hotel room. Local authorities claimed no record existed of his troublesome creek visit. The State Medical Board denied receiving any correspondence regarding the Fugates, as if someone had decided certain truths were too disturbing to acknowledge. These forbidden chronicles reveal America's darkest chapters that powerful forces attempted to erase, because understanding our past, regardless how disturbing, prevents repeating it. 40 miles southwest of Troublesome Creek, another family's narrative unfolded with even greater horror. The Whittaker clan of Odd, West Virginia, had maintained their bloodline purity across 6 generations before researchers discovered them in 1932. Unlike the Fugates, whose condition was visible, the Whittakers' genetic deterioration manifested in ways both subtle and devastating. Family patriarch Josiah Whittaker controlled 100 acres of mountain land passed through family hands since 1847. His great-grandfather had purchased the isolated property specifically to preserve what he termed bloodline integrity. Whittaker philosophy held that mixing with outsiders would dilute their strength, heritage, very essence. So they married within the family generation after generation, creating a genetic bottleneck that would prove catastrophic. By 1932, the Whittaker family comprised 21 individuals inhabiting 4 connected structures, forming a small compound. Anthropologist Dr. L. Lane West documented her visit in field notes that the Smithsonian Institution would subsequently classify and seal for 75 years. What she witnessed challenged every assumption about human adaptability and survival. The family communicated through an elaborate system of grunts, gestures, and nonsensical syllables that Dr. West initially mistook for a foreign language. After weeks observing, she realized with growing horror that most family members lacked cognitive capacity for structured speech. Generations of intermarriage had resulted in severe intellectual disabilities affecting all but 3 settlement individuals. Twins Ezra and Esther Whittaker, aged 42, functioned as family caretakers and decision-makers. They themselves were products of sibling union, but had somehow avoided worst genetic consequences. Ezra could read and write at basic level, while Esther managed household and tended family members, unable to care for themselves. The twins had married each other 15 years prior, producing 5 children, 3 surviving infancy. Their eldest daughter, 16-year-old Pearl, existed in perpetual confusion, her eyes widely spaced and unfocused, never seeming to land on anything specific. She wandered the compound in circles, picking up objects and dropping them, occasionally making sounds resembling laughter or crying. Pearl's physical development had stopped at age 12, leaving her trapped between childhood and adulthood, her mind unable to bridge the gap. Dr. West's most disturbing observations involved the family's youngest members. 8 children under 10 lived in the compound, all products of unions between first-degree relatives. 6 of 8 couldn't walk unassisted. Their legs, thin and twisted, couldn't support body weight. They crawled across dirt floors, their movements both heartbreaking and unsettling. The two who could walk did so with pronounced limps, their gaits awkward and painful to witness. Family medical conditions extended beyond physical and cognitive impairments. Hemophilia ran rampant through the bloodline, inherited from a single carrier 4 generations back. Minor cuts became life-threatening events. The family cemetery behind the compound contained 47 graves, most marking children who had perished before age 5. Fresh mounds indicated recent losses, the earth still dark and loose from digging. Esther Whitaker showed Dr. West their family Bible where births, marriages, and deaths had been meticulously recorded since 1847. The marriage entries revealed patterns that turned the anthropologist's stomach. Brothers married sisters with disturbing regularity. Fathers wed daughters when wives died in childbirth. Uncles claimed nieces as brides when suitable cousins weren't available. The family tree didn't branch. It tangled into a genetic knot growing tighter each generation. The Whitakers understood on some level their practices caused problems. Ezra confided to Dr. West, during a rare moment of candor, that he knew his children weren't right in the head. But what choice did they have? He asked. The outside world feared them, mocked them, treated them as less than human. Within their compound, they found acceptance, even if acceptance came wrapped in tragedy. Local authorities in Odd knew about the Whitakers, but maintained deliberate ignorance. Sheriff Clayton Burke, when questioned by Dr. West, shrugged and stated that mountain people handle their own affairs. The county had no resources to care for individuals with severe disabilities. He explained, better to let the Whitakers manage themselves than burden taxpayers with their problems. His callousness reflected broader societal attitudes toward isolated mountain communities. Dr. West attempted to convince Esther to allow some children to receive medical evaluation and potential treatment in Charleston. The suggestion provoked immediate hostile response. Esther declared outsiders wanted to steal their children, to break apart their family. The compound gates previously open were locked and barred. Dr. West was politely but firmly asked to leave and never return. Before departing, Dr. West witnessed one final scene appearing in her nightmares for years afterward. Young Pearl stood at the compound fence, her unfocused eyes somehow finding the departing anthropologist. The girl raised one twisted hand in what might have been wave or plea for help. Dr. West never could determine which. The image of that raised hand emerging from fog. Shrouded compound represented everything tragic about Whitaker legacy, a desperate reach toward a world forever beyond their grasp. Autumn 1938 brought federal attention to Appalachia's hidden communities, when President Roosevelt's New Deal programs expanded into most remote mountain regions. Works Progress Administration workers, tasked with building roads and infrastructure, began encountering families whose existence challenged modern understanding of American society. What they discovered in the hills of eastern Tennessee would force government to confront uncomfortable truths about its own citizens. The Colton family inhabited a valley so isolated it appeared on no official maps. 23 individuals, all bearing genetic markers of extreme consanguinity, lived in conditions WPA Supervisor James Morrison described as pre-medieval. His reports filed with federal authorities and subsequently buried in classified archives detailed a community where the gene pool had shrunk to collapse point. Morrison's crew first encountered 14-year-old Jacob Colton attempting to repair fence with tools he clearly didn't understand how to use. The boy's physical appearance immediately indicated severe genetic problems. His head, disproportionately large, sat atop a small, twisted body. His jaw jutted forward unnaturally, leaving him unable to close his mouth completely. Drool constantly dripped from his lips, which he wiped with back of deformed hand possessing only 3 fingers. Jacob led workers to family compound, a collection of ramshackle buildings seeming to defy gravity in precarious construction. The structures leaned against each other like drunken companions, their walls warped and roofs sagging under accumulated neglect. Inside these buildings, Morrison's crew discovered scenes haunting them for decades. Family patriarch, 68-year-old Amos, had fathered children with 4 of his daughters over 30-year period. His youngest wife, Rachel, was only 24 but looked 50. Her body aged prematurely by repeated pregnancies and inadequate nutrition. She nursed an infant whose skull hadn't properly formed, the soft spot extending across most of its head, covered only by thin skin pulsing with each heartbeat. The family's eldest member, 82-year-old grandmother Sarah, sat in rocking chair that had worn grooves into wooden floor. Her mind, sharp despite advanced age, held memories spanning family's descent into genetic catastrophe. She spoke freely to Morrison, perhaps recognizing final opportunity to tell their story before death claimed her. Sarah remembered when outsiders still visited the valley before family's reputation drove them away. She recalled her own parents, who had been second cousins, and how people whispered about their union, but ultimately accepted it as mountain custom. She witnessed her son, Amos, marry his cousin Temperance and later, after Temperance's death in childbirth, take his own daughters as wives to continue family line. "We didn't know no better," Sarah told Morrison, her gnarled hands gripping chair armrests. The preacher said family was sacred, that keeping bloodline pure was righteous. We believed him because we didn't know what pure meant. We thought it meant strong, not. Her voice trailed off as eyes swept across compound, taking in evidence of their terrible mistake. Morrison documented 14 children and young adults in Colton compound, none without significant physical or mental impairments. Twins Thomas and Timothy, both 17, shared condition where their spines curved so severely they could barely stand upright. They moved in shuffling steps, bodies bent nearly double, faces forever looking at ground. Communication with them proved impossible. They seemed to understand simple commands but couldn't form coherent responses. 9-year-old patients represented perhaps most tragic case. Born to mother and father who were half-siblings, she exhibited profound developmental delays alongside physical deformities. Her legs grew at different rates, making one limb 4 inches shorter than the other. Her cognitive abilities hadn't progressed beyond those of toddler. She sat in dirt, playing with rocks and sticks, occasionally making sounds resembling attempts at speech or simply vocalizations without meaning. Compound's makeshift infirmary contained 3 beds where most severely affected family members spent days. Morrison observed them briefly before requesting to be excused, his composure cracking. 2 adults and 1 child lay in those beds, their conditions so extreme that description seemed obscene. Suffice to say, genetic catastrophe had rendered them unable to perform basic human functions without assistance. Local physician Dr. Marcus Webb had treated Coltons sporadically over years, though his visits had grown less frequent as family's genetic problems intensified. He confided to Morrison that medical science offered no solutions for Coltons. Damage was done, written into every cell of their bodies. Only ethical response would be preventing further intermarriage. But family refused outside intervention. Morrison attempted to explain to Amos Colton that his practices were harming his family, that bringing in partners from outside the bloodline could prevent future suffering. Amos responded with anger and suspicion. Outsiders didn't understand their ways, he declared. Government wanted to destroy their family, to scatter them like seeds in wind. They would remain together, he insisted, come what may. The WPA workers completed assigned tasks and departed Valley, leaving Coltons to their isolation. Morrison's reports traveled through bureaucratic channels, landing on desks where officials rid them with horror before filing away. No intervention was authorized. Policy of non-interference in mountain communities remained intact, sacrificing Coltons and families like them on altar of political expediency. Winter 1945 brought unprecedented snow to Appalachian mountains, isolating already remote communities under blankets of white persisting until spring. In hills of southwestern Virginia, Blackwood family faced their harshest season yet, though cold proved less dangerous than genetic legacy they carried in blood. Social worker Margaret Chen, one of few minority professionals working in Appalachia, received assignment to check on isolated families during brutal winter. Her journey to Blackwood homestead required 2 days traveling through treacherous mountain passes, final miles accomplished on foot through snow reaching her waist. What she discovered justified every difficult step. Blackwood compound housed 19 individuals representing 4 generations of systematic interbreeding. Unlike Fugate's blue skin or Whittaker's cognitive impairments, Blackwood suffered from devastating combination of physical deformities, leaving most family members barely able to function independently. Family matriarch Virginia Blackwood, age 56, greeted Margaret with surprising warmth. Virginia could walk only with assistance, her legs twisted from childhood rickets exacerbated by genetic factors. But her mind remained sharp, and she recognized Margaret's visit might represent their only chance for outside help before spring. With painful honesty, Virginia shared family's secret history. Blackwood lineage traced back to 1872, when siblings Marcus and Louisa Blackwood fled hometown after their forbidden romance became public knowledge. They settled in Virginia mountains, assuming new identities and presenting themselves as cousins rather than siblings. Their children, unaware of parents' true relationship, married each other, compounding genetic risks exponentially. By third generation, every child born to Blackwood family exhibited some form of physical abnormality. Family tree Virginia showed Margaret revealed intermarriage pattern so extreme that calculating exact relationships became nearly impossible. Everyone was related to everyone else through multiple pathways, creating genetic maze with no exit. Margaret met 12-year-old Daniel Blackwood, whose condition exemplified family's genetic catastrophe. Daniel's skeletal structure had developed asymmetrically, leaving his right side significantly larger than left. His right arm hung nearly to knee, while left barely reached hip. His face showed same imbalance with features that didn't align properly. Despite challenges, Daniel possessed normal intelligence and communicated clearly, making his situation even more heartbreaking. He understood his difference, felt his isolation, mourned his limitations. Compound's children, 8 total, played together in snow, but games reflected physical constraints. None could run normally. Some crawled on all fours, others supported themselves on crude crutches fashioned from tree branches. Their laughter, genuine and innocent, contrasted sharply with visible suffering, creating cognitive dissonance Margaret struggled to process. Virginia's daughter-in-law, 28-year-old Catherine, had recently given birth to her 6th child. 5 previous infants had died within days of birth, tiny bodies too malformed to sustain life. This newest baby, girl named Hope, seemed healthier than siblings, but examination revealed cruel truth. Hope had been born with internal organs partially exposed, covered only by thin membrane. Dr. Chen, though not physician, recognized infant survival past infancy was medically unlikely. Catherine held hope constantly, as if embrace could somehow protect baby from genetic destiny. She sang lullabies in voice cracked by grief, rocking infant gently while snow fell outside cabin windows. Margaret watched scene unfold, understanding she witnessed love's futile battle against biological inevitability. Family's eldest member, 74-year-old grandfather William, represented last link to original ancestors' decision. He remembered stories grandmother told about Marcus and Louisa fleeing persecution for forbidden love. At time, their choice seemed romantic, defiant. 70 years later, their great-grandchildren paid price for romance in twisted bones and shortened lives. William showed Margaret family cemetery, where 63 graves marked short lives, cut even shorter by genetic disease. Most headstones bore dates spanning days or weeks rather than years. Some graves held multiple siblings, victims of same inherited conditions, killing them within hours of each other. Cemetery represented family's true legacy, generations of suffering etched in stone. Margaret documented everything: physical conditions, family relationships, living circumstances, desperate need for medical intervention. Her report, submitted to state authorities in February 1946, recommended immediate action, including genetic counseling, medical treatment, and potentially removing youngest children to prevent further harm. Response came swiftly. Budget constraints prevented intervention. Blackwoods, like other isolated mountain families, would have to manage alone. Margaret's passionate advocacy fell on sympathetic, but ultimately powerless ears. The system, such as it was, had no capacity to address generational genetic catastrophe on this scale. Before leaving Blackwood compound, Margaret made promise she knew might remain unkept. She would return in spring, bringing medical supplies and hopefully better news. Young Daniel watched her depart, asymmetrical body silhouetted against snow, uneven hand raised in farewell. Margaret turned away, tears freezing on cheeks, carrying weight of witnessing suffering she couldn't relieve. Stories of Fugates, Whitakers, Coltons, and Blackwoods represent just 4 examples among countless families whose genetic legacies were shaped by isolation and intermarriage throughout Appalachian history. By early 1950s, researchers had identified at least 37 distinct communities where consanguinity rates exceeded 50%, creating pockets of concentrated genetic disorders persisting into modern era. Dr. Helen Rodriguez, geneticist working for Centers for Disease Control in 1953, compiled comprehensive study examining long-term effects of sustained intermarriage in isolated populations. Her research, classified until 2003, revealed patterns challenging assumptions about human adaptability and survival. Data painted devastating picture of communities trapped by geography, poverty, and tradition in cycles of genetic deterioration. Study documented infant mortality rates in these communities reaching as high as 85% in some family groups. Physical deformities affected virtually every surviving child to some degree. Cognitive impairments ranged from mild learning difficulties to profound intellectual disabilities, requiring constant care. Life expectancy averaged just 42 years compared to 68 years in general American population at time. Dr. Rodriguez visited sites across 5 states, meeting families whose stories echoed those already documented. In eastern Kentucky, she encountered Ramsey clan, where 9 generations of intermarriage had produced population unable to digest most foods due to inherited metabolic disorders. They survived on limited diet, barely providing adequate nutrition, bodies slowly starving despite eating. In western North Carolina, Dockery family exhibited genetic condition affecting connective tissues, leaving joints so loose dislocations occurred during routine activities. Children learned to pop shoulders and hips back into place where others might crack knuckles. Pain was constant, but they had known nothing else. Their normal was agony. Tennessee's Pritchard settlement housed families where hereditary deafness affected 90% of population. Generations of silence had created unique sign language incomprehensible to outsiders. When Dr. Rodriguez attempted communication through interpreter, using standard American Sign Language, Pritchards couldn't understand. Their isolation extended even to how they processed world. Each community Dr. Rodriguez studied shared common elements: geographic isolation, poverty, suspicion of outsiders, and tragic ignorance of genetics, leading to devastating choices. Families loved each other, cared for disabled members as best they could, maintained dignity despite impossible circumstances. Their situations reflected not moral failings, but intersection of limited options and insufficient knowledge. Scientific explanation for conditions was straightforward, but brutal. Humans carry thousands of genes, many recessive and harmless when paired with different variants from unrelated partners. When close relatives reproduce, probability of matching harmful, recessive genes increases dramatically. First cousin marriages double risk of genetic disorders. Sibling unions quadruple it. Parent-child relationships create nearly inevitable catastrophe. Over multiple generations, genetic diversity necessary for healthy populations evaporates. Gene pool shrinks, concentrating harmful mutations while eliminating beneficial variation. Eventually, population reaches what geneticists call genetic load threshold, where accumulated mutations make survival increasingly difficult. Many Appalachian families Dr. Rodriguez studied had crossed that threshold, their future increasingly uncertain. Question facing authorities was what, if anything, could be done. Forcibly separating families violated fundamental rights, yet allowing pattern to continue condemned future generations to suffering. Educational programs required willing participants, which many isolated families refused to become. Medical interventions could treat symptoms, but not reverse genetic damage already present. Some families chose different paths. Fugates eventually allowed outsiders into community, diluting blue skin condition over several generations. By 1970s, characteristic cerulean complexion had largely disappeared, though carriers of gene remained. Families' choice to open bloodlines came too late for many, but saved descendants from continued deterioration. Other families vanished from records entirely. Whitakers, Coltons, and Blackwoods simply stopped appearing in census data after 1960s. Whether they died out, dispersed, or simply became better at avoiding official notice remains unknown. Their stories survive only in sealed documents and fading memories of those witnessing struggles. If you've watched until this point, you've learned truths about American history many would prefer remained buried. These families' experiences reveal how isolation, poverty, and lack of education created tragedies never occurring. Their stories matter because they remind us every community deserves access to knowledge and resources preventing such suffering. Now it's your turn to help ensure these stories aren't forgotten again. If you watched until here, it's because you like this story. Leave comment saying, "I watched until here so I can meet you and know who really enjoys the stories here on channel." Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another chapter of hidden American history. Hit like button to help others discover these important stories. Share this video with anyone believing understanding our past, no matter how disturbing, is essential to building better future. Forbidden stories of Appalachia teach us some knowledge, no matter how painful, cannot remain buried forever. Truth has a way of emerging, demanding recognition, insisting we bear witness to suffering even when uncomfortable. These families existed. They struggled. They loved and lost and persevered under circumstances barely imaginable. Their legacy challenges us to ensure isolation and ignorance never again combine to create such preventable tragedy. Remember their stories, honor their memory, work toward future where every child, regardless of geography or circumstance, has opportunity for health, education, and hope.